I hear her before I'm even fully awake. My mother-in-law's voice drifting down the hallway, thin and almost wet sounding, as if pulled through earth. And every night, every single night, it happens at 2 a.m. exactly. She calls my name the same way she did the morning she died, except back then, I ignored her. I let her call for me until her voice faded, and by the time I opened her door, she was already gone. I know how that sounds. I know what it makes me. But what follows? What's been happening in my house for the last year? None of it is something I ever wanted to believe in. And yet here I am, unable to sleep, waiting for that voice to scrape down my hallway because ignoring it only makes things worse. I've never told anyone this. Not my husband. Not my friends. Not even the therapist who told me my nightmares were just guilt. But if you're listening now, if you found your way to this story, then I hope you're ready for the truth I've carried in silence. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. All right, let me go back to where all of this truly began. It was early last winter in our small town outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The kind of place where the silence has a weight to it, and the nights stretch out longer than seems normal. My husband, Mark, had taken a contract job that kept him out of the state for months at a time, leaving me alone to care for his aging mother, Eleanor. Back then, the house still felt normal, just another creaking old place with dry air and thin walls. I spent most of my days moving between my remote accounting work and checking on Eleanor in her room at the end of the hall. She was already fading then. Some days she didn't remember who I was. Other days she remembered with too much sharpness. We had a strained relationship, and that's putting it kindly. She didn't trust me. Didn't think I was good enough for her son. Didn't hide it, either. Still, she was family. And when someone is dying under your roof, you tell yourself you'll find patience you never had before. You tell yourself you'll rise to the moment. But guilt has a way of twisting those memories, doesn't it? When I think back now, I see every moment differently. Every sigh I ignored. Every complaint I brushed off. Every night I went to bed early because I just couldn't deal with her today. It's strange. People assume haunting always starts with a sound, or a shadow, or something moving where it shouldn't. But mine began with a feeling. A heaviness in the air. A change in the way silence behaved in the house. Like the walls were holding their breath. The first strange sign came 2 weeks before Eleanor died. I was walking past her bedroom to take laundry to the kitchen when I felt a sudden cold streak across my ankles, just my ankles, as if someone small and desperate had brushed past me on the floor. I froze, because Eleanor hadn't walked unaided in months, and nothing else in that house could have moved that fast. When I looked into her room, she was asleep, breathing loud and uneven, her thin chest rising under the blankets. Nothing seemed out of place, but the cold stayed clamped around my legs for a long time, almost like a warning. At the time, I pushed it aside. Arizona houses get drafty in winter, I told myself. Old windows, old vents, old everything. But deep down, I knew the house had shifted somehow. I just didn't know it was shifting toward me. That night, I woke up at exactly 2 a.m. with the feeling of eyes on me. I sat up slowly, expecting to see Eleanor in my doorway, confused or afraid. But no one was there. Just the hallway, dark, silent, too still. I remember whispering to myself, "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But the feeling stayed, circling me, tightening around the room like a faint, invisible thread. I should have paid attention. Should have known something was unraveling. Instead, I went back to sleep. And 2 weeks later, she died calling my name. I wish I could tell you I rushed to her. I wish I could say I tried. But the truth is uglier, and the haunting that followed is the reason I'm finally telling this story. Because ignoring her then was the mistake that tied her spirit to me now. And the slow, quiet terror that would take over my life started with that first cold brush against my ankles. Looking back, life before the haunting feels almost embarrassingly ordinary. A soft, muted stretch of months where nothing felt urgent, nothing felt dangerous. Just the slow routine of caretaking, working from home, and waiting for Mark to return from his contract jobs. He'd leave for 8 or 9 weeks at a time, fly back for a long weekend, then disappear again. I told myself I didn't mind, that I liked the solitude, that I was used to being the one holding things together. But there's a difference between being alone and being trapped inside a story someone else started. Eleanor's decline had been gradual for years, but the winter before she passed, it picked up speed. She fell more often. She forgot whether she'd eaten. She'd start a sentence and then stare through me as if I had pulled the words out of her mouth. She was a proud woman, distrustful, rigid, and sharp-tongued even in her good years. But she loved her son. So when she looked at me, I could feel her searching for the faults she always believed were there, waiting for proof I wasn't enough. I wanted to do right by her. I really did. But caretaking is its own kind of erosion. It wears you down in ways you don't notice until you're half the person you used to be. Most mornings I'd bring her breakfast, set her pills beside the plate, and try to make gentle conversation. She didn't like being hovered over, so I learned to step away. I'd listen from down the hall while she ate, ready to run if I heard her choking or dropping things. That constant state of alertness, of being on call for someone who resented needing help, was exhausting in a way I never said out loud. Mark appreciated what I was doing. At least, he said he did. But appreciation from a distance is different than presence, and I was the one hearing Eleanor call out at 3 in the morning because she dreamt she was falling. I was the one picking up her spilled soup from the carpet, scheduling her appointments, and calming her when she forgot the month. We weren't close, but proximity makes its own intimacy. I learned the way she liked her blankets folded, the strange lullabies she hummed when she was afraid. The exact second her voice shifted from irritation into panic. Oddly enough, those were the same moments I felt most guilty for how desperately I wished she would get better, or just be someone easier to love. You tell yourself that caretaking builds character, that it's noble, but really, it just magnifies whatever cracks were already inside you. And at that time, I had plenty. I'd been fighting this quiet, private bitterness for months. Not at her, necessarily. More at the situation. At the fact that I'd put my life on hold while Mark kept his intact. At the weight of feeling like I was failing someone who already assumed I would. I didn't realize how much resentment I'd been carrying until small things started irritating me. Her calling my name 5 times in a minute, her asking for water after I'd just brought her a glass, her forgetting conversations we'd had only hours earlier. I'd smile. I'd do what she asked. But inside, something was fraying. And that winter, the house itself seemed to mirror that fraying. Lights flickered more often. The pipes groaned long after the water stopped running. Doors felt heavier, like they didn't want to stay closed. I remember one afternoon in particular. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a bowl, when the faintest whisper drifted through the air. Not a word exactly, more like the start of one. A breath being shaped into sound. I turned so fast the dish slipped from my hands and cracked in the basin. But there was nothing behind me, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I listened for a long time, heart thudding against my ribs. And then Eleanor called for me from the other end of the house, her voice sharp and annoyed, and I convinced myself the whisper was just the building settling. I shouldn't have dismissed it. But when you're already running on fumes, your mind will bend reality before it admits something unnatural might be happening. Life carried on in those small, grinding routines, me working during the day, checking on her hourly, making sure she was eating, bathing, resting, trying to maintain patience even when she muttered under her breath about me, thinking I couldn't hear. The last days before she died were the heaviest. The air grew colder in the house even though the heat was running nonstop. And sometimes I'd catch her staring past me, eyes locked on a corner of the room as if someone else was standing there. When I asked what she was looking at, she would blink and give me this hollow little smile. Nothing, she'd say. But her voice always sounded frightened. The night before she passed, she barely slept. Every hour she'd call my name, confused or half dreaming, asking if someone was in her room, if I'd just been standing beside her bed, if I'd whispered something to her. I told her no, I hadn't, but the unease in her eyes stayed. And by morning, that unease had settled in me as well. I just didn't understand yet that the things she saw, the things she heard, weren't hallucinations. They were warnings, and I was already too tired and too numb to pay attention. Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact color of the sky that day, a flat, indifferent gray, like even the sun couldn't be bothered to check in. She had called my name 3 times that morning, weakly, her voice thin and papery. But I was in the middle of a white call, and for once, I told myself she could wait. She didn't. When I finally walked into her room, the air felt different. Still, almost held in place. She lay there with her eyes half open, her mouth parted as if frozen mid-syllable. Her hand was reaching toward the doorway, toward me, but already slack. I stood there too long before calling anyone. Too long before touching her. Too long before letting myself feel anything. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It came in slow waves, tiny stabs whenever I passed her door, a heaviness when I saw her empty chair, a tightening in my throat every time Mark tried to talk about funeral arrangements over the phone. He told me none of it was my fault. But he wasn't there. He didn't hear the weakness in her voice that morning. He didn't see the way her hand was reaching for help that never came. Her room stayed closed for days afterward. I told myself I wasn't ready to pack her things. But really, I didn't want to step back into the space where she died alone. Then, 5 nights after her passing, at exactly 2 a.m., something woke me. At first, I thought it was just the house shifting in the cold. But then I heard it, this soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the end of the hallway. 3 taps, then silence. 3 more, then silence again. Like someone gently knocking. Like someone trying not to wake me but needing to be heard. I lay there frozen, staring at the ceiling, my breath shallow. The tapping continued, steady and patient, until I finally forced myself to sit up. I checked the clock. 2 a.m. On the dot. My chest tightened. That was around the time Eleanor used to wake up disoriented, calling for me. She always thought it was morning at 2 a.m. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight before stepping into the hallway. The air felt colder than it should have. Heavy again, like that morning she died. The tapping stopped as soon as I took a step. Silence thickened the space around me. "Hello?" I whispered. A pointless question. But fear makes you reach for anything that feels human. Nothing answered. No movement, no breath, no shuffle. I forced myself down the hallway, my pulse hammering. The light from my phone shook in my hand. When I reached the end, I realized the sound had been coming from behind Eleanor's bedroom door. The same door I hadn't opened since she died. I stared at the knob, expecting it to rattle, or turn, or do something dramatic, but nothing happened. Just that cold, expectant silence pressing against me. I didn't open it. Not that night. I told myself I was imagining the noise, that grief plays tricks, that old houses settle and shift. But when I climbed back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been on the other side of that door, waiting. The next day, little things started happening. A framed photo of Mark and me tilted on the wall even though no one had touched it. A spoon fell off the counter by itself while I was making tea. The hallway light flickered every time I walked underneath it. These were all things that could be explained. But each one left me uneasy, like the house had become a living thing, a watcher, not just a shelter. 3 days later, I heard her voice for the first time. I was folding towels in the living room when a soft breath of sound drifted into the room. Anna. My name, spoken so faintly I almost missed it. But it was unmistakably her voice. Weak, fragile, just like it had been the morning she died. I turned so fast I almost fell, scanning the doorway, the hallway, the kitchen. Empty. My heart thudded in my ears. I waited, barely breathing, listening for anything else. Another whisper, a shuffle, the tapping returning. But the house stayed silent. Later that night, while brushing my teeth, the bathroom mirror fogged over even though the water wasn't running. A message slowly formed in the condensation, one shaky streak at a time, as if someone's finger were dragging through it. Help. I stumbled backward, hitting the counter. The word remained there for a long moment before the fog faded and took the message with it. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just grief wrong. Not just imagination wrong. Something had followed her. Or maybe something had been here longer than either of us realized. But I wasn't ready to understand it. Not yet. Because the next night, when the tapping came again at exactly 2 a.m., I heard her voice on the other side of the closed door. "Anna, open, please." But I didn't. I stood there, trembling, staring at the door and listening to the soft, patient tapping that kept time with my heartbeat. The same tapping I'd someday give anything to forget. If the tapping in whispers had been isolated moments, maybe I could have convinced myself they were cracks in my grieving mind. But they didn't stay isolated. They multiplied. They became routine. They became a schedule the house seemed to obey. And everything, every strange sound, every cold breeze, every whispered syllable, led back to 2 a.m. That time became a boundary, a thin line between the world I understood and the one that waited behind it. The tapping returned every night for a week. Sometimes faint, sometimes sharp enough to rattle the door frame. I tried earplugs, white noise, even falling asleep on the couch with the TV playing old sitcoms. Nothing helped. No matter where I slept, the sound reached me. One night, desperate, I laid a towel at the base of Eleanor's door, thinking maybe it was airflow or some pressure issue. But hours later, when the tapping started, I walked down the hall and saw the towel had been pulled into the room through the gap beneath the door. The fabric was stretched tight, like something had hooked it and drawn it inward. A draft couldn't do that. An old house couldn't do that. I told myself not to open the door. That if it was something else, something I couldn't accept yet, opening the door would be an invitation. But the not knowing became its own kind of torment. The next morning, I found something else. The mirror in the hallway, the one Eleanor insisted we keep even though the frame was cracked, had a new streak across it. At first I thought it was dust or a fingerprint. But when I leaned closer, I saw it was a word, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Why? I lifted my hand to the glass. It wasn't written on the surface. It was smudged from the inside of the mirror, like a breath pressed against the wrong side of reality. My stomach twisted. I pulled away so quickly my elbow hit the wall. And for the rest of the day, I couldn't walk past that mirror without feeling like something behind it was following my movements. But the worst part was the guilt. It pressed heavier with every strange occurrence. Because I knew exactly what that question meant. I knew what the voice wanted. It wanted to know why I didn't go to her. Why I didn't answer when she called. Why she died alone. I had buried those thoughts deep, but now they clawed their way back up through every silence. That Friday, I broke down while trying to fold laundry. I sat on the bedroom floor with a pair of Mark's old jeans in my hands and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. I told myself I was grieving, that any strange event was just layered trauma. But the truth was starting to crack through me. Something was here, and it wanted me to face what I'd done. The breaking point came 2 nights later. I had fallen asleep on the couch deliberately, exhausted, drained, not wanting to face the hallway. I left the TV on low, hoping the noise would drown out anything unnatural. At 2 a.m., the television turned off by itself. The sudden silence jolted me awake. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Like the whole house was listening. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow, dragging, moving down the hallway one uneven step at a time. I froze. My throat tightened. They weren't the footsteps of someone walking confidently. They were the shuffling, struggling steps of someone frail, someone dying. Someone who used to call my name in the dark. I sat up, barely breathing, staring at the entrance to the hallway. The footsteps reached the edge of the living room, then stopped. A chill rolled over the couch, and then a whisper right beside my ear. "Why didn't you come?" I jerked away, falling onto the floor, scrambling back until my shoulders hit the wall. My heart hammered so violently I couldn't hear anything else for a second. When the ringing in my ears faded, I realized something horrifying. There were fingerprints on the arm of the couch. Not mine, not fresh, but the faint outline of long, thin fingers, pressed deep into the fabric as if someone had been gripping it tightly. I turned on every light in the room. My hands shook uncontrollably. The air felt thick, charged, as though something unseen had only just left the space. That night broke something inside me. Not just fear, a realization that the haunting wasn't random. It was pointed, personal. Every sign, every whisper, every movement circled back to the same moment. The moment I made a choice not to go to her. The moment I decided she could wait. My guilt wasn't just emotional anymore. It had shape. It had intention. It had a voice. And it followed me relentlessly. The next morning, I walked down the hallway determined to open her bedroom door at last. My fingers trembled on the knob. I turned it slowly. But the moment I pushed the door open, a blast of cold air hit me so violently I stumbled backward. The room was dark, untouched since the day she died, but something in that darkness felt awake. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker. The bed looked sunken, as if someone had lain there all night. And the air held that same stillness, the kind that feels suspended, withheld. I stepped back and shut the door. I couldn't go inside. Not yet, because something was waiting in there, and I wasn't ready to face it. But the haunting wasn't waiting for me to be ready. That night, the tapping returned stronger than ever, and for the first time, the door handle turned. The night the door handle turned, something in me shifted. Fear didn't vanish, but it reorganized itself into something sharper, something cold and focused. Panic had become useless, dread was becoming routine. And at some point, survival instinct stops begging and starts planning. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stared at the handle as it twitched, one slow, deliberate click at a time, as though a weak hand on the other side was trying to remember how to open a door. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but underneath it, a calmness surfaced, a thin, brittle thread of determination. If I didn't take control, this thing, this presence wearing her voice, would never stop. The handle stopped moving after a moment. Silence rolled down the hallway, heavy and waiting. I backed away, forcing myself not to turn my back on the door until I reached my room. I locked myself inside, even though I knew a lock meant nothing to what was haunting me. I sat on the floor, breathing slowly, trying to keep my thoughts from scattering. Something wanted me to open that door. But not out of curiosity, out of obligation, out of guilt. For weeks I had let the haunting direct me. Now, finally, I understood. The only way through this was to confront it, directly, intentionally. I was done being hunted in my own house. But planning required clarity, and that meant first acknowledging the truth I'd avoided for so long. Eleanor died calling my name, and I ignored her. Not because I didn't care, but because I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and angry at circumstances I never chose. I pressed my hands to my face and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The apology wasn't to the house, or even to the ghost. It was to the version of myself that had been drowning for months. A small release washed through me. Not relief, just honesty. It was time to stop pretending this was all in my head. Time to stop treating this house like a prison. I grabbed a notebook from my nightstand and wrote down everything that had happened. The whispers, the tapping, the mirror message, the footsteps, the door handle turning. Seeing it on paper made it real in a different way. Orderly, contained. Seeing it on paper made it real in a different way. Orderly, contained. And then, for the first time, I noticed something. A pattern. Every unsettling moment, every physical movement of objects, every whisper, every manifestation, had happened within a few feet of Eleanor's old room. Her room was the anchor point. If I wanted answers, I'd find them there. But the thought of going inside still made my stomach clench. So I approached planning the same way I approached work problems, methodically, step by step. Step 1, prepare the space. Step 2, protect myself emotionally. Step 3, create controlled conditions. Step 4, confront whatever waited there. But as I laid out the steps, dread crawled up my spine. Because the truth was, no plan guaranteed safety. Still, doing nothing was worse. I needed to understand what the presence wanted, whether it really was Eleanor or something else entirely. That afternoon, I cleaned the hallway for the first time in weeks, wiping down walls, sweeping corners, clearing dust. The simple act made the space feel less oppressive, even though the air still held that familiar weight. Then I gathered what little courage I had and stood outside her door. My hand hovered over the handle. Not yet, I told myself. Not tonight. I needed to approach this on my own terms. I needed preparation, not impulsiveness. So I spent the next day assembling small things that made me feel grounded. A candle, a small frame photo of Mark and me, a sweater Eleanor once complimented even though she denied remembering doing so, and a notebook for documenting whatever happened. I set everything on the dining table like supplies for an expedition. Around sunset, the house grew colder again. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones, not your skin. I wrapped my arms around myself and paced, 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. Fear prowled at the edges of my mind, but determination steadied me. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a conversation, one that had been avoided in every sense, both in life and in death. Around midnight, I took a long shower, letting hot water chase away the tension. I rehearsed what I might say if the voice came again, what I might ask, what I needed to hear. Then, around 1:40 a.m., I sat in the living room with the candle burning beside me. The flame flickered constantly, even though there was no draft. My breath tightened as the clock ticked closer to 2 a.m. I felt the atmosphere shift, like someone had stepped into the room. This was it, the moment I'd decided on, the moment to stop running. I rose from the couch and walked toward the hallway. The shadows swayed slightly on the walls, as though leaning toward me. When I reached Eleanor's door, the cold was immediate, seeping through the wood. I pressed my fingertips to the handle. "I'm here," I whispered. "For real this time." The house answered, not with tapping, not with whispers, but with a slow, steady breath of air from beneath the door. Warm, human, as if something on the other side had moved closer, waiting for me to turn the knob. I took one last deep breath, steadied myself, and prepared to open the door to confront whatever had been calling my name every night. But I didn't realize until that moment at the threshold. I wasn't just opening a door. I was opening the past. I turned the knob. The metal was ice cold. A cold that didn't belong in Arizona. A cold that didn't belong anywhere alive. It resisted at first, like something inside didn't want to let go. Then it loosened, slowly, grudgingly, and the door creaked open. The air inside the room was thick, heavy, warm and cold at the same time, like two temperatures fighting for the same space. For a moment, I couldn't see anything. Shadows pressed together, layered like curtains. Then the smell hit me. Not rot, not decay, just hospital air. Old sheets. Fear turned into scent. I stepped inside. My breath shook. The candle in my hand flickered violently, casting trembling light across the furniture, the dresser, the chair, the untouched blankets on the bed. Nothing moved, but the air felt aware. Listening. "Eleanor," I whispered. My voice sounded small, too small for the room. A shape stirred near the far corner. Not a full body, just a darker patch of darkness, peeling itself from the wall the way steam rises from water. I froze. The shape shifted, stretched, lifted itself, not upward, but forward, toward me. My legs trembled, but I didn't step back. I forced my voice again. "I'm here. Tell me what you want." The darkness stopped, then leaned, tilted, like a head turning. A whisper slid across the room. "Why?" It wasn't quite her voice. Not fully. Too thin. Too stretched. Like the words had traveled a long distance through something not meant for speaking. Still, I knew it was meant to be her. Why didn't I come? I answered, breath shaking. "You want to know why?" The shape flickered violently, as if the word why had agitated it. "You heard me." The whisper came from everywhere at once. Behind me, beside me, inside my ears. "I heard you," I admitted. The words hurt, but they came out clear. "I heard you call my name that morning." I did, and I didn't come fast enough. The darkness pulsed, a slow, deliberate movement, as if breathing. "You were scared," I continued. and you needed me. And I hesitated. The room temperature dropped so quickly the candle's flame shrank. Alone, the whisper shook the walls. My throat closed. Yes, I said softly. You were alone. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Nothing whispered. Nothing breathed. The shadows hung suspended, waiting. Then the bed groaned, a long, low sound, as if someone invisible had sat on it. The mattress dipped. The blankets folded. Indentations formed, the shape of legs, of hands pressing weakly into the surface. My knees nearly buckled. Eleanor, my voice broke. What do you want me to do? The shape on the bed shifted, turned toward me. Slowly, painfully slowly, something rose from the blankets. A head, shoulders, then the faintest outline of arms pushing upward. Not solid, not fully formed. A half body, made of shadow and memory. My breath hitched. The figure leaned forward, trembling, reaching. Its hand, if you could call it that, extended toward me. Long fingers stretching, straining, shaking under their own weight. Come. The word scraped through the air like bone dragged across metal. For one desperate second, I thought she wanted forgiveness, connection, closure. But the longer I watched her hand reach, the farther it extended, the more I realized something horrifying. She wasn't reaching for me. She was trying to pull me toward her, toward the bed, toward the darkness she now lived in, toward the loneliness she believed I owed her. I stumbled backward, the candle trembling in my grasp. No, I whispered. I'm not going with you. I'm here to tell the truth, not join you. The shape convulsed, like a glitch in reality. Its form blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. A shriek tore through the room, not loud, but piercing. Hi! Thin, almost begging. Everything moved at once. The shadows whipped around the room. The dresser drawers slammed open and shut. The mirror cracked down the center. The bed frame shuddered violently as the shadow lunged. I screamed and stumbled toward the door, clutching the candle so hard the wax burned my hand. The temperature dropped to freezing. My breath turned white. Don't leave me again. The voice hit me from behind, closer than it had ever been. Right at my shoulder. I bolted into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind me so hard the wall shook. I fell against the opposite wall, gasping, trembling, staring at the closed door. On the other side, silence, then a whisper, faint, wounded. Anna. Not angry, not vengeful, just longing, desperate. A loneliness so deep it drowned the rage. My tears fell hard and fast, because for the first time, I heard what was truly beneath the haunting. She didn't want to hurt me. She didn't want revenge. She just didn't want to be alone anymore. That realization, that terrible, heartbreaking truth, was what finally broke me. But knowing why didn't mean the haunting was over. Because when I stepped back from her door, shaking and breathless, I knew something had changed. I wasn't just being haunted anymore. I was connected, bound, and I had to figure out how to live with what came next. For the next few days, the house felt bruised. Not broken, not violent, just wounded, like all the tension had snapped and now everything was breathing slowly again, relearning its shape. I avoided Eleanor's room, not out of fear, but out of respect. After the confrontation, some part of me understood that what stirred inside that room wasn't a monster. It wasn't something malicious hunting me. It was grief. Hers. Mine. Woven together so tightly that pulling it apart felt impossible. The nights grew quieter. Not silent. The silence still carried weight, but the tapping stopped. The footsteps faded. The voice didn't whisper my name anymore. And yet, I didn't sleep. Not much. I kept waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. It felt wrong to have peace after so long living inside tension. Like my body didn't know how to exist without dread. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for her. Listening the way I used to when she was alive. Half expecting her frail voice calling from her bed, asking for water, or warmth, or reassurance. And every time I remember the truth, that the last time she called for me, I didn't go, my stomach tightened all over again. But something had shifted since the night in her room. The guilt didn't hit with the same sharp violence. It came softer now, like a bruise healing beneath the skin. 3 days after the confrontation, I gathered the courage to open her door again, this time in daylight. The air inside was still colder than the rest of the house, but not painfully so. Just tired. Dust floated gently in the golden light coming through the curtains. The bed was exactly as I'd left it. The furniture stood still, nothing out of place. The cracked mirror reflected only me, just me, no shadows behind my shoulder. The room felt smaller somehow, less threatening, more like a memory than a haunting. I walked to the bed and sat down slowly. The mattress sighed under my weight. A normal sound. Not supernatural. Not a sign. I rested my hand on the blanket she died under. Soft. Warm. Faded from washing. I used to tuck this blanket around her feet when she complained of being cold. A warmth pooled in my chest. A painful kind, but also gentle. I should have come in sooner, I whispered. I should have listened. The room didn't respond, but the air felt less heavy, as if the quiet itself accepted my words. I stayed there a long time, letting the stillness settle around me, not haunting me, just filling the space. When I finally stood up, I walked to her closet. Her clothes were still hung neatly, sweaters, long skirts, the shawl she wore during her last holiday dinner with us. Touching them felt like touching a past version of her, one who laughed more easily, one who wasn't sick yet, one who didn't resent needing me. I realized then that I had held onto the worst version of her for too long, the bitter, frightened, dying version. I had forgotten she'd been more than her last months. And maybe the haunting, the tapping, the whispering, the demand to confront her wasn't about punishing me. Maybe it was about reminding me she had been someone whole before she became someone dependent. That night, for the first time in weeks, I sat at the dinner table instead of eating standing up or on the couch. I lit a small candle, made myself a quiet meal, and placed an empty plate across from me, not as an offering, not as superstition, but simply as acknowledgement. A seat for the presence that had shaped my life in ways I never expected. Around 9 p.m., I walked to the hallway and stood there, listening. The air was calm. No cold drafts, no tapping, no footsteps pacing their lonely path. But then, gently, so softly I first thought it was the house settling, I heard it. A single breath. Warm. Soft. Not desperate. Not angry. Just present. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't ask anything of it. I simply let the breath wash through the hallway, a final acknowledgement that something had shifted between us. And after that, nothing. For the first time since she passed, nothing happened at 2 a.m. No whisper, no tapping, no footsteps, just the quiet hum of the heater and the natural creaking of an old house. The absence of the haunting felt almost sacred, a strange, tender kind of peace. Over the next week, I began cleaning out her room. Slowly, carefully, not rushing, not purging, just releasing. Her clothes were donated. Her books were packed for Mark. Her photographs, some of them of him as a child, some of her late husband, were boxed with care. The room grew emptier each day, lighter, like her presence, not the angry, desperate echo, but the true essence of her, was finally letting go. The last item I removed was the cracked mirror. I wrapped it in an old towel and set it by the door for disposal. When I lifted it from the wall, I noticed something behind it, a small, faded note taped to the back panel. Her handwriting, shaky, uneven, but unmistakably hers. It read, "Thank you." My breath caught. Tears welled instantly. I pressed the note to my chest and stood there, overwhelmed by a quiet, devastating understanding. She had been grateful for the care I gave, even if she couldn't express it, even if fear and illness twisted her into someone harder to love. And maybe, just maybe, the haunting had been her final attempt to say what she couldn't while alive. That night, I slept for the first time without fear. And at 2 a.m., I dreamed of her standing in the doorway, whole and calm, no shadows clinging to her, no desperation in her face. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once, and then she was gone. In the months that followed, the quiet settled into the house like a new kind of heartbeat. Not heavy, not haunted, just present, just real. I kept expecting the nights to slip back into the old pattern, the tapping, the whispers, the cold that didn't belong. Trauma makes routines out of fear, and even when the fear ends, your body waits for it like an old friend with bad intentions. But nothing came. 2 a.m. became just a number again, no longer a threshold between worlds or a reminder of what I had ignored. I'd wake sometimes out of habit, glance at the glowing numbers on my bedside clock, and feel only quiet. A soft quiet, a forgiven quiet. The house felt different too. Warmer in the mornings, less tense at night. The hallway no longer stretched with that strange, expectant heaviness. Even Eleanor's room, now empty, walls repainted, sunlight reaching into corners that once felt too dark, held a gentle sort of openness. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway and just breathe. No fear, no dread, just memory. I kept her note, the one taped behind the mirror. I framed it and set it on my dresser where I could see it every morning. Thank you. Those words softened the sharp edges of that winter more than anything else ever could. I didn't tell Mark the full truth. I told him I struggled after she passed, that I felt guilty, that grief made me imagine her calling for me again. But I never told him about the tapping, or the footsteps, or the way her shadow tried to pull me into the dark of her room. I never told him I had heard her breath inches from my ear. Some truths live better in silence. Some confessions are meant only for the ones who experience them and the ones willing to listen. The haunting didn't leave scars on the house, no broken walls, no shattered mirrors, but it left marks on me. Not visible, not painful, just enduring. It taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. We don't always fail because we don't care. Sometimes we fail because we're tired, because we're human, because the role of caretaker asks more of us than we have to give, and we don't realize it until the moment has already passed. And guilt, real, bone-deep guilt, doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It lingers, it reaches. It finds you in the quiet of your house when the world is asleep and reminds you of the voice you didn't answer. But guilt can be faced. It can be spoken aloud. It can be softened if we're willing to walk toward it instead of letting it chase us. I don't know if what I saw was truly Eleanor's spirit, or a manifestation of everything unresolved between us, or some mixture of both. Maybe the supernatural and the psychological overlap more than we realize. Maybe our grief shapes the shadows around us. Maybe the dead reach back not because they are angry, but because they are lonely, and we're the only ones who can still hear them. What I do know is this: she's at peace now. I feel it in the walls, in the stillness, in the way the nights finally let me sleep. And for the first time since she died, I'm at peace too. Not because the past changed, but because I stopped running from it. That is the truth I came here to share. A hard truth, a haunted truth, but a necessary one. And if my story reached you, if any part of it stayed with you, then maybe you understand something of what it means to carry guilt and what it means to let it go when the world finally gives you permission. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels.